Hi everybody. This video is going to go over one of the two last projects for English 680, and of the two projects this is definitely the biggest one that is worth the most significant portion of your grade. So this project is a unit of writing assignments, and big picture what this assignment asks you to do is figure out how you would apply the ideas of the writing process and the theories and practices that we've been talking about in this class to a class of your own. And there are two due dates for this project. So two parts, so the first two components of this project, there are drafts of those two drafts of those two components due Sunday, November 24, so that's in 2 weeks. And that is a draft of the learning goals and a draft of the sequence of assignments. And then the final draft, which will also include a reflection, is due Tuesday, December 10, and that is during finals week. So I will go over each of these pieces in a little bit more detail. So the first piece I'm going to talk about is a list of learning goals. As I say here in the instructions, you should create a list of learning goals that your assignments will fulfill. And this should include goals that are related to writing instruction. So you should be considering things that we've talked about in class, including things like writing for different audiences, generating ideas through writing, developing effective revision strategies, and using grammatical and stylistics to enrich writing. If your unit has other goals, such as goals related to reading and interpreting literature, you should also include those. And as I also say here in the instructions, each item on your list should begin with an action verb. And there's a link here if you are trying to figure out what some good verbs are. There's a link that will take you to a website that has some links with a website that has some verbs that you may consider using. And then also each learning goal should finish the sentence, students will be able to. And here at the bottom of the section, I've given you an example. So a couple examples would be students will be able to use free writing to generate ideas for a paper. And students will be able to vary sentence structure and length in a piece of writing. So those are just two examples of what I mean by beginning with an action verb that finishes that sentence, and also two examples of learning goals that are related to concepts we've talked about in this class. Okay, the next component, which is probably the biggest part of this project and the one that will take you the most time, is the sequence of writing assignments. So the sequence of writing assignments should include 4 things. The first thing that it should include is a list of readings. So that will be any readings that you plan to assign as part of this project, including readings that prepare students for the writing assignments and activities. So if you were teaching this in a class, what readings would you be assigning to students as part of this unit? So if you are organizing this unit around like works of literature, such as short stories or poems or a novel, you should put those on your list. And if you plan to assign anything else out of, say, a textbook or a website, you should also put that on this list. So any readings that would be assigned as part of this project, as part of this unit of assignments, should be on this list of readings. The next piece of this is a major writing project. So as part of this sort of sequence assignment, you need to create a prompt for a substantial nonfiction prose writing assignment. And by nonfiction prose, I mean that you should avoid asking students to write poetry, fiction, or drama. The focus of this class is on composition, not creative writing, so I want you to focus this unit around a composition assignment. This doesn't mean that you can't be creative, and it doesn't mean that you can't ask them to do something like a narrative essay or other genre that draws on sort of creative elements. It just means that I don't want it to be something that fits in one of those sort of 3 main genres. So I don't want it to be a work of fiction, I don't want it to be a work of poetry, and I don't want it to be a work of drama. But it can still be creative. And I especially encourage you to consider rich tasks like the assignments that Treble mentions in her article, or problem-based activities like the writing experiences that Warren describes in his books. Those are both examples of assignments that sort of move beyond traditional, essays or papers. And so I do encourage you to think about things like that. The prompt itself that you put in the sequence of assignments should be written to an audience of students. So it should outline the goals and expectations for the assignment, and it should try to anticipate students' questions, things like page length, formatting requirements, deadlines, and how you plan to assess the assignment. So just like what you have in front of you is an assignment prompt that I've given you that tries to anticipate those questions. You should be producing something. Doesn't necessarily need to be quite so long, but it should try to anticipate those questions the students would have. Okay, and then in addition to the list of readings and the prompt for a major writing project, you should also have additional writing assignments and activities. So I want a minimum of 4 additional writing activities or assignments that prepare students for the major writing project. Or these could also be things that come after the major writing project and encourage them to reflect on it. That would also be acceptable. So these can include graded assignments, say like a shorter response paper that's preparing them for the larger project. Or it could include low-stakes activities, so things like free writing, daybook prompts, revision activities, reflections. All of those would count towards writing activities that could be part of the sequence. And as far as how you sort of format those or set those up, if you are including a graded assignment, so something that actually has a kind of sort of a higher stakes grade attached to it, I would want you to create an assignment prompt that's written to an audience of students, and that explains the goals and expectations for the assignments. If you're doing things that are more lower stakes, then I want you to either write out the instructions as you would say to them in a class, or a handout with the instructions. So basically try to convey, how you would present that activity to the students. And then the last piece of this is an opportunity to revise. So revision needs to be a clear part of this sequence in some way. And there's different ways that you can do this. You can, explicitly include a revision schedule as part of the major writing project prompt. Or if you want, you could also include a revision activity as one of your additional activities or assignments. And if you have other ideas for how to include it, you can run those by me as well. Those are just 2 examples of how you might include that in the sequence of assignments. And then, in addition to those required sort of pieces of the sequence of assignments, there's also some things that you may want to include that are optional. So, for example, if any of your activities or assignments rely on a handout, then I want you to include that handout. And if you have an activity where you're sort of working through a sequence of events in class, you may find it useful to include a lesson plan that lays out how you would plan to integrate that activity into the class. So for example, if you're modeling something and then asking students to go and do that for themselves, it might be really useful to include a lesson plan that shows, first that you're modeling this part of the writing process, and then you're having students go and work on that, and then talk about it in groups, and then reconvene, et cetera, et cetera. So that would be an example of something where it would be really useful to have a lesson plan that shows how you plan to sort of implement this activity in class. And unlike these other components, or these other pieces of the sequence of writing assignments, the lesson plan does not need to be written to an audience of students. So that should be written to an audience of teachers. And then the last piece of this is a reflection. So your reflection should be a minimum of 2 double-spaced pages, but it will probably be longer if you are, doing this if you're taking this sort of seriously and taking your time with this. So essentially, this reflection should explain how your sequence of writing assignments reflects the ideas and practices that are discussed in class readings. And unlike the other pieces of this project, unlike the other pieces of this project, the audience for this reflection is me. So you can assume that I'm the person that you're writing to and not students, and not necessarily even your peers. So I want you to definitely answer three questions in your reflection. The first question that I want you to answer is about how you're applying the ideas about the writing process that we've talked about. So the question I give you is, our second unit was devoted to reading and discussing different scholars and teachers' theories of the writing process. How does your sequence of assignments reflect the writing process as you understand it? So this is basically asking you to connect the sequence of assignments, the various writing activities, and assignments that you've developed, and think about how those reflect your understanding of the writing process, and connect back to the readings that we've talked about. The second question has to do with the kinds of assignments that you're including in your sequence of assignments. Excuse me. So as part of our unit on the writing process, we discussed the value of problem-based rich tasks that encourage students to write for an audience beyond the teacher. So I want you to explain how your sequence of assignments prepares students to write for a wide range of audiences and situations. So how does it prepare students to write for not just the teacher and not just a traditional formulaic kind of essay, but how does it encourage them and prepare them to write for a wide range of audiences and a wide range of situations? So how does it encourage them to sort of cultivate transferable skills? And then the final question talks about sort of assessment. So our final unit, which we will be beginning very soon, focuses on assessing and responding to student writing. So I want you to think about how you would approach assessing the activities and assignments in your sequence of writing assignments. So will you plan to use rubrics? Would you plan to just give completion grades? What kinds of things would you focus on when you're doing your actual responding to student writing? And as I say in this last paragraph, where possible, I want you to draw on the readings in your response to students' questions. So I'm going to be looking for you to be making connections back to readings that we've done throughout the semester to demonstrate that you're thinking about how the unit that you've put together reflects the ideas that we've been talking about and reading about throughout the semester. And as I say here, you're also welcome to include points that you've made in prior discussion posts or your synthesis essay. So I want you to be building on the things that you've been thinking about and writing about throughout the semester. And your reflection can certainly reflect these things that you've already been thinking about or already been writing about. So as I mentioned before, the first draft of this, so the draft of the list of learning goals and the draft of the sequence of assignments are due Sunday, November 24. If you have any questions, feel free to reach out to me. And otherwise, I look forward to seeing your guys' drafts.